have things just perfect before I let it go. So it takes a lot longer to get things done, and then you run into external stressors
Right on.
besides.
Yes. So being a perfectionist and wanting things to go just a certain way, having a certain personality type can actually be a stressor, especially when you're trying to get things accomplished.
Right.
I see that in myself, trying to do things, and it makes it sometimes impossible to get a simple task done just because you want it done just so. Yeah.
And I just want to make sure things get done. And so we have a great balance.
That is a good
So there's an
balance.
external stressor very close.
So your source of hope is also your source of stress.
Yes.
I'm not willing to look at that right now. Isn't that
It
funny,
works
though?
out, but
It's a motivational force.
each of us to the other.
That's funny. And the love that binds. So it's that being known. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I like the journey, he likes the getting there
Right.
too, which is totally backwards, I don't know.
You're both in the same vehicle, but one might be going 100 miles an hour.
Yep.
How about wanting to please other people?
Oh yeah, being a people pleaser.
And when that doesn't work, yeah, you get the stress from it rather than them.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. Not being able to say no.
yeah.
That ties into that. Not being able to say no to things. I'm glad you didn't say no to me today, but in every other situation, learn to say no. Can you think of another one internally generated?
Stress related?
Yep.
Yeah, being married.
Being married, he says.
Yeah,
That's
it's-
external and
it's true.
internal.
No
It
two
is true.
people think alike.
Doesn't the Bible say that?
And I've had, pardon?
The Bible says that if you marry, you will
Right.
have trouble.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because
thought
she's a not a perfectionist, but as close to one as you can come to. And I am not, okay? And I can say back 10 years ago, I could have stressed out where I was ready to pick the roof right off the house, okay? Just because something got moved from here to there and I couldn't find it,
Oh yeah.
okay? Which was my own problem. I had to back off because you have to put your mind halfway into the course of the other person. If you don't, you could put yourself right in a deathbed because
Yes.
it would catch up with you after a while.
That's true.
But after 61 years, I've learned to just take a deep breath and think twice before I open my mouth. Because
I'll
you
probably
can
never
put yourself in a very stressful situation.
If you don't learn how to be silent at times.
And I'm sure she gets very stressed out with me too, because I don't live the same way she does.
Yeah.
I could be gone 8 hours a day and it wouldn't bother me a bit, but she would rather I'd be there 4 hours instead of 8 hours out.
And that's what you were saying,
So,
that those internal things turn into
Yeah.
external things, especially when two
Yeah.
minds that live together
Yeah.
aren't acting in the same way.
And of course, like I told you the other day, reading those quotes and reading that quote book that Hoda Copy just put out, I'll tell you, I've learned a lot from that book in the last, and I'm not one to go out and get a book and read, but I love poetry and I love quotes, and she writes a nice paragraph on every quote, and it is just super, and it's very relaxing because you see yourself as you go through it
Oh yeah.
and say, yep, I do that, and now I won't do it because I've read about it, so.
So that's part of being resilient, creating a new way to think about
Right.
something, think
Yeah.
about it, and then act out what you're
Yeah.
doing. So
Yeah.
even though those words seem a little wonky, those three elements really are at work in so many different things. One last internal one I thought of that could cause stress was like illness, right? Something that's going on invisible to other people, but that's happening inside of you, that can all of a sudden create this feeling of despair and hopelessness and loneliness that you can't necessarily articulate. I think we really covered the external with the internal sources of stress. And so we have this scenario to consider. This actually happened this past spring. We had an airman who he's 23 years old. The only thing I want you to think about the scenario, actually after I read this, we're gonna pause and have you talk a little bit to your neighbor, Tim. I'll actually have you talk to Merle, okay? And then Cheryl and Ron can talk. Consider this, that you're 23 years old and the only thing you've ever wanted to do with your life is to be a pilot in the Air Force. Now, while you're attending flight school, you go out one night with friends and have a few beers. Driving home, you're pulled over and charged with an OUI, When your military supervisor finds out in the morning, you're quickly dishonorably dismissed from the military and from flight school. Your hopes and future dreams are shattered. Now what are you gonna do? I want you to think about that in two ways. Think about it from the point of view of the young man or the young woman, and think about it from the point of view of somebody who loves this person. How you're going to help them have hope. So Tim, I'll have you come over and talk to Merle. And we'll give it just a few minutes.
As the young man and as somebody.
Well, maybe for starters, you should,
Kick their ass.
kind of go
No, just
through
kicking their ass does not do a
the
thing,
issue
they're gonna
that
kick their ass.
Makes me
caused
feel
it.
bad.
He was drinking and.
Don't spank them over spilled milk.
And it was a violation, so he needs to come to grips with that,
Well,
I think. And,
it's like Dave
but
in
his
Australia.
Mhm.
goal was to become a
I
pilot in
didn't
the
feel
Air
like I had
Force.
to yell
Well,
at him, he
maybe,
was yelling at himself enough.
maybe
Right.
that's, maybe he's
Right.
kicked out of the service,
But
but
then
maybe
it's
he
just
could still be a
talking
pilot.
through letting
Doesn't mean he
him
couldn't
talk about what
achieve
he
that goal of becoming a pilot,
wanted to do
maybe
and
in
his goals
commercial
he
lead
was
Mhm.
doing
rather than in the
and letting
military.
and just kind of listening to what he's saying and kind of giving little pushes to say, well, what else could you do?
How to help that person would be
Yeah.
to be a good listener.
What's the
He'd have to be a good listener.
consequences? You know, you don't have to pile on more
Get
consequences.
himself
No, you don't. They have to come up with,
But
in
at
another
next
point of view,
situation in life. where
okay,
he
you
is
can't
that
fix
goes
this, you can't
always
change
now.
this, and you can't keep beating yourself up.
Yeah.
He decides he wants
You can beat yourself up, but
Yeah.
you have to keep
It
moving
just
forward at the
set
same
him back
time,
even
because
further.
Right,
Uh,
because you get locked into just,
don't get locked into just beating yourself up.
right. Well, it still comes
He
from
was
there.
dismissed from
For other
the
things, right,
military,
that's
the flight
switch.
school. But that don't mean
It's
on
pathways
appeals
that
that
you
he
can
couldn't
pass
get
to
back
get
into the military.
You know, if that's been the only goal.
Yeah.
I know.
And how do you develop a goal?
Find out what he would need to do to prove that he
Find out
deserved that second chance.
You know,
Yep.
talk to him, what
second
would,
chance.
could he,
And a lot of praying and a lot
Marines
of
accept
faith
him.
to get him to
Maybe
where
it's
he
gonna be
wants
wild,
to
it's-
be.
would the Coast Guard, those are all the other places where you could go into flight school and still do that. Are there other ways of doing this? Are there?
And if his
that would
dream is
still-
completely shattered, then
He's gonna
you'll have to get
think
get another dream, another
he's
goal.
gonna have to
How
work
can you
on
do
another
that?
goal.
What else can you do?
I love it, I'm listening, and I've heard you come up with at least a couple of solutions to each one, so that's nice. The more you think about it, the more you can
Mhm.
come up with, and you've only had a couple minutes to think about it, but what are some of the ideas that you came up with?
For him to look at, talk to people in other branches of the military and see if they would accept him even though he has an OUI, and what he would have to do to make up for that, and if there are options there, or if there are other flight schools he could go to, and if that's even what he wants to do, is another flight school outside of the military. It's very different things.
Right, exactly, so it's those pathways, but also breaking it down and thinking about it.
Yes.
Is it all about the military, or is it really about being a pilot? Is it that or that? That's kind of a delineation that I heard you make. I don't know if you know that you made that, but that's what I heard you
Okay.
say.
Oh, so you're kind of pulling apart the goal to see,
Yeah, like what is this goal?
right?
What is this goal about? Is it about the military, or is this goal about
Hmm.
flight school?
Just being a pilot, because he could be a pilot in so many other ways. He could be a bush pilot. He could,
That sounds like fun.
yeah,
It does.
yeah. Or
Exactly.
commercial pilot. So
I think we see this a lot too. I was going to ask, I think, an even harder question about being a retired person whose life is tied to their identity and their profession, and then suddenly they're gone. We'll see this misplaced a lot with people who are retiring from the military, because you're leaving behind an entire group of people that you belong to, but now you're so far removed from that, becoming a civilian. And so people will start questioning who they are as a human being. It's an existential crisis, because who am I without this thing to define me? What's that meaning again that we go back to? Is there anything else that you wanted to add to it? I think you did good. I had fun listening to your conversations. So tying it up, sometimes in our life, we'll have hope. Hope doesn't work the way that we think that it's going to be executed. Things will come tumbling down. There'll be holes in our pathways, or holes in the way that we're thinking about something, and so life changes. And to just kind of tie it in, I wanted to show you where Bob is now, the cat Bob, with his new owner, to show you what happened just based off that brief exchange between a homeless fellow caring for a cat. More reading on the screen this time. Whoops.
Hello guys, how you doing? You want to say hello? It's very friendly. Such protection, he loves the spotlight, he knows where the camera is, you know, so he's a poser. Looked after each other and progressed in healing each other's problems, you know. We have unconditional love for each other. Well, most of the time.
Good friends.
I love that because it's like they found hope in one another, but also they were recognized as meaningful and having purpose in one another, just in being who they were. They didn't have to change who they were. You know, they still do the street stuff and have actually a nonprofit now that helps other animals and street people, which is kind of cool. So you just never know where it's gonna go, especially if you have somebody to
When you
build dreams with.
watch something like that, you wonder where the expression dumb animals came from.
Yeah, really.
You know, animals are smarter than we are in most cases.
Don't ask that. Don't ask us that. We know that you love dogs and a cat person for sure. So, just to kind of recap, looking at an end, there is an expression that says that you're never going to find a moving van attached to a hearse. Yet I found a picture of it. But really, in real life, you're never going to see a hearse with a moving van to move you anywhere, because in the end, it's all about where we find meaning and relationships that we have, and that's really, in the end, what we rely on to give us hope and to sustain us is our connections and what we draw hope from. So as a recap, can you tell me the 3 elements to hope? Can you remember them?
Agency,
Agency is
pathways,
yeah.
and the first one is
Anybody else fill that in? Goals.
Goals.
Right, Ron. So goals, you have to have goals.
Yeah.
The pathways is the ways that you get there, and the agency is the way that you think about how you're going to get there, and being able to take those things and be able to maneuver them to really fit whatever the circumstance is. Is there any questions that you have about anything that we covered, or anything that you want to add?
I have to come up with agency for that moniker. I think I have trouble making the connection of why you'd
Okay.
come up with that.
With agency,
Yeah.
agency is more the internal way that we think about hope,
Okay.
where pathways is the external way. Yeah, that's the way that I tell myself. I say the willpower versus the way power.
Yeah, there you go.
So if you don't
Okay.
have the ways, that's a good clarification. If you
Mhm.
don't have the means to do it physically, how can you think about it differently, creatively, to get around a certain problem? It's like a person maybe who is, I know I'm just coming up with something on the fly, but somebody who's maybe disabled or something like this in some
Mm.
way,
Right.
or doesn't have the same amount of money as somebody else, or the same education or whatnot, but you want to get to that same place. So you know you're going to have to invest maybe emotionally in this area of your life. Like, you're going to have to get better grades in school to get a scholarship to pay for your education versus like having a mom and a dad who might just pay for you to go to school. Or if you have an impediment like an ailment, you might know that you're going to have to need to plan ahead to take breaks and to sleep and get the rest that you need so that you're physically able to do the pathway that you've put in your mind. Does that make more sense?
Yep. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that took a little bit for me to make the connection, so I say willpower and weight power.
Very good.
Is there anything else that you can think of? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Oh no, thank you for coming. And I'll give you your $500 each at the door.
Oh,
All right.
good.
Good.
I like that.
Good job.